I hear a lot about, you have your collectors, and then if you change too much, how do they respond to that? But I think as an artist, it's important to follow where you are, like where your interests are, and that will change and evolve as you grow.
Welcome to the Flying Fruit Bowl, a platform dedicated to the discussion and exploration of art and the creative process. I'm the host, RNS. This week's episode is part 2 of my conversation with painter Emily Wallerstein. If you haven't heard part 1 yet, please listen to last week's episode, as this part is a direct continuation of the conversation. Thank you very much. As a culmination of years of hard work, Emily has her first solo show at Tag Gallery in May 2023, in which she'll be presenting a new body of work called Gloss and Rules. What is your creative process, and do you have any particular routines that help you focus on your art?
Well, I find inspiration from photos that I take when I'm out and about, just going around the city. And oftentimes I like to capture the magic hour at dusk when the light is just a certain way and it's warm. It makes everything a little more from rose-colored glasses, just a little more romantic. And I've tried to scout areas or say, okay, I'm going to go take some inspiration photos today. And I've really found that doesn't always work. It really has to be something that just comes in the moment. And I'm just, taken aback by the sky at this time, and I just happen to be in this place. And so the kind of randomness of it, I actually appreciate a lot. So yeah, that's basically there. I start from photos, and then I kind of collectively put them in series and decide what series I'm going to focus on. And then as I start painting one series, I become more inspired, and then continue finding inspiration in those areas and subject matters. Yeah. So, but a lot of times it's very unplanned and unnatural, or more natural. It's better that way. So then once I take the photos and plan what I'm going to paint, then I usually do a quick underpainting, and then I paint it. And I often start with the skies. The skies are usually very large, and then the scene below is usually more minimal at the bottom. And I like to paint the skies really smooth, with the bottom being more abstract, the actual, landscape being more abstract and maybe a little more textured, just to juxtapose between the sky and the softness of the sky and the city down below.
I think that's really interesting, actually, this idea of the use of texture to kind of signify almost like the busyness of the city, because like the texture is also quite busy where the sky is quite smooth. And it's
Right.
like, how when you look at the sky, it can be very captivating. Like, I like the idea because you look at your images and as you said, it's like a lot of sky. You want people to be drawn into that, and people to be drawn into the kind of, like, as you said, romanticism and beauty. I think that's a really interesting idea. But like, what kind of a scale do you paint at?
Usually I paint large. Between 30 to 40 and up. My largest painting now is 48 by 60, so that is pretty big for where I've been. But I actually prefer working large. It allows for a little bit more movement, and the kind of tediousness of when it gets smaller. Sometimes I kind of struggle. I like the freedom of the movement of your arm and hand, and really getting more emotion into the painting. I think there's a little more freedom to have that texture and brush strokes when you have a larger space. But I do have some small pieces too that are like 11 by 14, and those I try to keep actually really textured. Sometimes I just do it with a palette knife, so I don't get so focused on the detail. Because the smaller it gets, the more detail it's, you're working really tiny, and it can be quite tedious.
Do you keep a sketchbook?
I don't actually.
Because I guess that means that the smaller images you paint would probably be like more like studies to like the larger images.
Yeah,
Because
for
like
sure.
I just thought like that's interesting. If you don't keep a sketchbook, it's not like you have, a book to hand to give you like compositional ideas or like, ideas for colors or whatever. It's just a case of like when you sit down in front of the canvas or, say like a piece of wood, whatever you paint on, like the ideas come to you then from the photo.
Right.
And actually, how lifelike are your images compared to the original photos?
Usually they're pretty lifelike, but then with my interpretation of the way I, mix the color and apply the texture. But really, they're often true to what
Oh,
the
wow.
photo represents. Um, but I've been playing around with these blurred images, which is kind of interesting because the camera is blurring it for me. So there's something different about it, that it's a little less natural because it's like this abstract blur that isn't really, the car lights of what I saw in the moment. It was what the camera took from, the movement. So that's kind of interesting how accurate that then becomes to the original image. Almost those abstract blurred images from blurred reference photos are more true to the image of the photo than sometimes what a traditional landscape might be, where the detail
Yeah.
is, because there's more room for me to interpret it by
Yeah.
the way that I apply the paint and everything.
So that's a
Um,
really interesting point because like it's almost like the camera is noticeable in that image, in those kind of images, because it's like you have to kind of seek out what's in front of you. Whereas in like a landscape, you see a landscape, you know what it is instinctively, whether it's
right.
textured or not. With like a blurry image or images that are quite kind of a bit more hazier, that you kind of have to search for the meaning in those images or search out what you're looking for.
Yeah.
Um,
I
I,
have been more interested in just going back to the sketch. I
yeah.
was trying to do one painting a day of just really
Oh,
rough, um, small on unstretched canvas. And I am still exploring the idea. And they are like studies, but I also want them to be finished pieces that people can buy and that are more accessible and affordable to the
mm,
general public. But there's still this, quality piece of fine art that feels a little bit more raw. But I actually like that about those pieces. So I started it, but as I prepare for my next show, I felt like the pressure of taking time away
yeah.
from the show painting. So it's something that I want to revisit after in the summer.
So when it comes to showing work, and this is definitely a bit premature because it's definitely on my list for a little bit later, but do you create work for a show or do you like to show the work you've already created?
A little bit of both, but
Mm.
generally I'm always work on a new body of work for an upcoming show. And
Oh,
then I bring in whatever is left over from the other show
mm,
and show that as well.
I see.
But I always do try to have something new.
So because your images are quite large and they're in inches for people here in the UK, because obviously in the UK we don't use inches necessarily. Um,
Oh, okay.
yeah,
Yes.
we do centimeters, we do centimeters,
Got
but
it.
other people do inches and feet, which is funny. So like with work, with creating work such a large scale, like how do you store it? Like where do you store it?
That's something I'm working through. I work out of my home,
Mm,
so we have a garage in the back that is not used for, it's just used for storage, not for cars. So I
yeah.
do keep them, covered and secure, some in once they're dry. Right now, I have this, little area behind me. Used to be my painting nook, and then when I really started needing more space, I moved to the back room of our house, which was like a spare room. So now I'm using that to put paintings on easels and store things for now. And then I'm getting to the point where I'm like, where is this going to go next? But I am just doing it around my house, and I do try to hang some work up in my house, but I
That's so
also
cool.
don't, the oil painting, does smell, so
Yeah,
I don't want to have a whole room of drying paintings that we're supposed to be like watching TV, and so
yeah,
when they're dry, I do always have some of the paintings up too. I like to enjoy them until they go to new homes.
Yeah. Like, because I think this is an interesting thing. And now that I've asked you, I've kind of realized I haven't really asked people that often in terms of like what they do their work once it's complete. Because, we
Yeah,
always see them, we always see it online and we always see, people having shows, but like, what happens to them in between? Because I don't
right.
think we really talk about it. And I don't know how much you talk about with other artists, but like, storing your work is so important. And like, doing it properly is so
Yeah.
important to preserve it. And I just,
Yeah,
now I'm thinking about it, it's not something I've spoken to with most artists, I think, for a while at least. So I think it's definitely what I'm going to start adding on to these conversations and just to check because I feel like it's a good idea to kind of get ideas and tips and advice because not everybody knows how to store their work and also like where
right,
to store it and the best conditions in which to store it. So
right.
maybe that's something I should add on to the.
Yeah, I do want to have like a better shelving system, and I see other people's studios, so
Mm,
I do try to gain inspiration when I'm peeking into other people's
mm.
studio views of how what's best. And I think as I grow as an artist, I'll, figure those things out, better ways to do things.
So it's interesting because you said that, when you paint images and when you go and take pictures for the images to paint, you don't really do it with the thought of going out to take images, which I'm really curious about. So like what makes a good composition for you? Like what has to be in the image or like how do you know that like, an image you take is going to be a painting?
Um, I mean, balance is always important to me. And I think it's just about what draws me to the photo when I think, oh, that's it. And sometimes I'll have like 5 images that seem very, very similar, and I'll, put them all consecutively and go back and forth, and just delete and like, okay, this one, now this one, and just really
Yeah.
edit. And so definitely take so many photos. My iPhone, it was kind of my sketchbook in a way.
Yeah.
And then I put it into folders. So if I go out, I usually try to do it that same day. So if I get a good lot of like 25 photos from a cool sunset or place that I went, I'll go that night and really try to go through and identify which are the better photos that I might want to paint in the future. And then I put them in an inspiration folder on my phone. So then it's saved for later. It's not like in the millions of photos I have, it is easier to access. But and a lot of times it's funny because I'll hold on to photos or inspiration for a long time, and I know I want to paint them someday, but then something else is more priority for whatever reason, and it just gets kind of put saved for later. But it's cool when it comes back around. I just painted a photo for an artist call in January, and the photo was from 2019. And it was, I really searched back and was, I remember that. Let me check and see what that series of photos looked like that might be right for this call. And then I chose one and painted it. So it's an interesting process to just hold on to everything and then decide when is the right time. And I just now have realized that when I do that, and sometimes it's just about the photo, but then I'll go back and be like, what was going on? Why was I there? Or like
Mm.
what? And then I'll see what was going on in my life or why I was there, and I'm like, huh, like okay, like that makes this photo even more special. Or even at the time I didn't realize I wasn't putting all the things together. So it's interesting the way you can be drawn to an image or a time and not really remember why, and then kind of look back at all the photos around and kind of put the pieces of the puzzle together and realize like there's more
Mm.
meaning to the painting or the image than you thought.
Yeah, I think that's really amazing though, because I think we lose so much by letting go of things. And I think sometimes your best work could be sitting in a folder somewhere on your phone. It's just a
Right.
case of timing as well, though. That's also the thing. It's about timing. Like you have to be
Yeah.
in a certain mind frame to look at a certain image. Because the thing is like where you are and what you're doing and the person you are now will look at images very differently. Like an image from 10 years ago, you'd look at it very differently now. So it's
True.
all about timing. It's all about kind of also like the need. Like because obviously
Right.
you were an artist school to create work for, it presented a need for you to go look back. And I think the fact that you look back rather than creating something new, I think that's really, really interesting actually. And it's kind of
Yeah.
the sense of like I guess like memories and nostalgia, does that play a role in your work?
Very, very much so. It's a huge role. I think most of my paintings, whether they're realistic or not, are all about memories and nostalgia. And I try to tie in stories or, just either broad ideas of what's going on in the world at that time or how the the image relates to my life. And um, the Blur series that I was working on, that's more abstract, where it's just the traffic lights and just the um, circles. I, I wish I knew the actual correct term, because I did discover there is a term for this, the
Oh,
blurred like lights. I might be able to find it quickly, but
is it the
anyway,
halations?
I think, is it? Is that
Yeah,
what it is?
halations. I'm sure it's got halations.
Okay, yeah.
I think it's called
So
halations. I'm sure it's called halations. Like when you got like the ring of light around like
yes,
whatever. Yeah,
uh-huh. But the
halations.
technique I thought is called something
Oh,
too.
it might be Oda. That might be something related for that. I've got no
Um,
idea, but I know that I don't
yes,
know that.
yeah.
I'm not cool enough to know that.
Well, I wasn't either, and I've been painting that way for a couple of years now. And then I'm like, oh wow, there's a name for this. But yeah, so those are very symbolic of memories, because I think about memories a lot, where as you age and you look back, and it's very few memories are really imprinted that are very clear. I
Hmm.
think that oftentimes they are just this kind of overarching haze of emotion of that time of your life. And I think that's very strange and intriguing to me. Um, just thinking of, when I was 5 or 10, and really there's some core memories, but most it's just like, oh, I was living here, and that's kind of what I was. It's really interesting to me. So those blurred images are reflective of memories of time.
So how are you looking to develop your work in the future?
Well, I definitely have new series, like I said, that I've been storing for a while. So
Yeah.
I have a good, like, probably a year or two of work that I've been wanting to work on for a while. So I'm looking forward to those. Um, and I will just, say that they're the Bangladesh series, which I'm really excited about, painting and sharing the story and kind of my inspiration for why that series is important. I've been wanting to paint a series of large scale landscape photos of the wind turbines. There's a
Oh,
like wind turbine fields in Palm Springs, and I just find them very fascinating, because they're always on this vast part of land, and they're
yeah,
just these man-made things, but they're producing power, and it's just natural, and they're so giant, and there's just something really awe-inspiring about them. So I have that I'm working on. And then I want to work on this series that I've been also have a huge folder of probably 100 images of reflections of and
oh,
shadows of, mostly from walks, but sometimes they're of, and the trees creating the shadows on the ground, with the light shining through. But then there's some that are the light shining in, on our home, that creates these like kind of dreamy light reflections on the walls at dusk. So they definitely are more abstract, and they're less of a landscape, but they do play, a nod to memories and emotion, and just the reflections of life and light and shadow and dark and light, and kind of how that encompasses, our lives.
yeah.
So while the subject matter might be different from what I've done before, the kind of underlying theme still plays true throughout. So those are some of the like three major groups of series that I want to work on. And then I'm not sure. I'm kind of curious how my
Yeah.
my work will evolve. And I do. I'm. It's curious. I'm curious how others evolve in their work as well,
Mm.
because I hear a lot about, you have your collectors, and then if you change too much, how do they respond to that? And but I think as an artist, it's important to follow where you are like where your interests are, and that will change and evolve as you grow.
Yeah, because you have to remember, like, your relationship with your own work will change as well. It's not
Right,
just it's not just you catering for the masses, because I mean, right now at least you are in a like a position where you're at the start of your journey in so many ways, so that
right,
you have the freedom to do whatever you want, and you can say, "Oh, I've got these like 3 series of bodies of work I really want to produce," and it doesn't really matter right now, how good they are, because you can work on them. You've got, like, giving yourself like a year or so to at least work on at least
right,
one or two of them. I
right.
feel like the ideas for your series are really, really lovely. And I think that
Yeah,
they're really, really fascinating because it's about yourself, but it's not about yourself. It's like based on you and your memories and your travels and kind of just like the way your observations of the world, but they're
yeah,
about such interesting universal themes that people can really relate to. And there could be
right.
so many stories told through those images that you didn't even think of. So I think
Yeah,
that's really, I think that taking the idea of darkness and light, I'm like, I'm going to love to see these, because I think so many people are going to be able to relate to that.
yeah,
And it's nice that you're thinking about it like universally and long term.
yeah,
I think that's
right,
what's going to make people really attracted to your work. I think that because, a landscape, as much as I love landscapes, a landscape can be very limiting because you're painting a certain place. And if
right,
people are from this place, they might be bored of it, or if people aren't from that place, they might be kind of looking at it with like, "Oh, this is a nice landscape." Whereas in something that is, I think something that I think I don't know, maybe I'm just getting a bigger appreciation for abstract art at the minute. But I feel like with abstract work, because you have to use your own intuition to understand what it's about, I think it leaves more scope for the viewer to kind of like really become in tune with that work, as opposed to being like, "Oh, this is what I presented with. This must be
right.
what I need to get from it." So I like this idea. I think it's a really interesting idea.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah,
See if I
I'm
can execute it.
no, but that's it. I'm really curious. But also, I love the fact that you're very like, I would give myself time to do this. You're not in a rush to get it done tomorrow. Obviously, you want
Yeah,
to get it done. You want to actually get it done, but it's like I love the fact you're not putting any pressure on yourself. And I think a
yeah,
lot of artists do. They put a lot of pressure on themselves to produce so soon because of the algorithms and all that fun stuff.
right. I
But
mean,
it's
I
nice.
often think about everything for a very long time before
Mm.
I take action. So that's kind of just my way of
But that's
working.
good though. Like that's a good thing because as you said, like you create a series over 10 years, and it's like
Mhm.
the fact that you've got the patience to do that. That says a
Yeah,
lot about you and the process and the way in which you kind of think about things. Because I don't know anybody. I don't think I've met anybody. At least no one said to me that they've created a series over 10 years, and I actually really respect that. And when I listened back to it and I was editing it, I was like, this is really interesting because that takes some dedication. Because
yeah. It was a lot though because it didn't have the time to do it. I
yeah,
mean, and so, but yeah, it was just this thing there. I wasn't in a hurry, and I felt that it became more interesting as I added on more
mm.
layers, textures, and yeah.
Do you think that social media puts people, or at least artists, like in the mindset to always have to be constantly producing and be in a hurry?
I think it can. I don't think it requires, one to feel that way, but I do, especially when you see your peers or the other artists that you follow always seemingly producing, or if they produce faster than you. But what I like about social media is you really can just share what you're working on. It doesn't always have to be this start to finish, or you can just give a little snippet of something behind the scenes that I think is interesting. And it doesn't always have to be this like, you know, from start to finish, here's the finished painting and now we move on. But I do think that social media can be challenging when you're really exposed to so much all the time, and it's best not to compare yourself and really just focus on what you're working on.
So, like, what are your thoughts on social media in terms of like, do you enjoy social media?
I do. I think it's interesting how there's all these different platforms and they're always evolving. Where I used to do Facebook because that was the first thing, well, after MySpace, right? And
Mm.
then it became Instagram and TikTok. And so I know that it needs to evolve always because that's life and the way the industry works. But I do think it's hard to keep up sometimes, and especially as generational, like the more you get out of touch with it, the more it moves on, then maybe the less connected you feel to it, or whatever is the next thing. You have to be willing to abandon the old thing and learn the new thing,
Yeah.
and some people don't. So, but I do appreciate the community and really the reach that you're able to, like, just for instance, having met you and then seeing
Yes.
all the artists that you're connected to, and you're exposing me to artists that I may not have ever come across, and then I can be inspired by them and connect with them too. So I think that for community, I really actually appreciate it very much.
So, do you think there's a difference between making art and making content?
uh Kind of, yeah. Um, I mean, making art can be content,
Hmm.
but also some people, make content specifically to make content. Um, and I struggle because I think everyone, like my close friends, are like, "Oh, I love watching you paint," and they get
Yeah.
that dialogue, and I do think that the audience enjoys it, and I enjoy. I like watching a time lapse because it's
Yes.
satisfying to see my work from start to finish, and nothing turns into something. But
Yeah.
sometimes I don't necessarily want to film myself. I don't feel like having a camera on me while I paint. So there there's a certain level of like, okay, well, I haven't done that in a while. I should create or film something to let everyone kind of in on what I'm working on and share it.
Actually, now you said that, I just thought I haven't asked anybody this as well. But like when you're painting and you're filming yourself paint, are you aware of the camera?
No, and that's what's funny. Sometimes I'll start painting and I'll sit with it for 30 minutes or an hour, and then I go to stop it and I'm like, oh my gosh, like the angle was off, or I moved the table that the camera was on like at the beginning, and so I'm not really aware of it.
So I'm kind of curious to just to think about artists and wonder if like if they know they're being filmed because they're filming themselves painting an image, does that change the way they paint the image? Versus if nobody was there to watch it. Because artists, you're in your own space, you're kind of like in your little private world creating your work. And it's like it's
Right.
a sanctuary,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
having a camera
Yeah.
there and having like even though it's nobody's watching it, but having that camera there, knowing some people will watch it, like does that
Right.
change the way in which you actually create the work?
Um, it doesn't. For me, I have to create it the way I'm going to create it, and it doesn't matter. I feel like I just kind of contradicted myself because I said sometimes I don't feel like having a camera on me, but then I said I don't notice that. But I
Yeah.
think when I'm okay with it, it's like once I put it on, I block it out.
Right.
But yeah, sometimes it feels personal, and it feels like, well, maybe you're working on a really hard part, and you're going to
Mm.
struggle with it, or maybe this part won't be that interesting, so you just decide not to film it. And so yeah, sometimes you just want it to be private, and it's kind of interesting though. It's not always this planned thing.
But that's interesting. It makes me think about artists who are a lot more curated with like the aesthetics of like filming themselves because that can
Right.
be in a way a whole art form in itself because
Yes.
getting certain angles, certain lighting, certain even like aesthetically pleasing as you said like parts of the image painted like that
Right.
could be almost a market in itself. So it's kind of
Yeah.
weird that you should say that. It's just made me think like, oh, like, I bet people probably do that.
I'm more of an amateur about it at the moment, and I do see other people's in their studio, and or maybe they have a photographer come in and film them partially for marketing purposes,
Hmm.
and I think that's okay too.
Oh yeah, of course, absolutely. That's actually
Yeah,
something I would love to do in the future. My plan
yeah,
at some point in the future is to go meet artists and do like small little promos for them. That is kind of my plan in the future.
very good.
In probably about 5 years' time at this point, because I said this like last year, and this year I'm not doing it. So,
Yeah,
because I
that's
need the
okay.
skills to do that though. That's the thing. It involves me learning. I
Yeah,
don't have the time right now. So, but it's because I thought like, why not just go to London and meet some cool artist friends that I've got that I've made and like record them and do a bit of promo for them because like I love that kind of
Yeah,
stuff. Like I love trying to help artists kind of even like with marketing and promo and creating reels for them and stuff. Because sometimes artists don't want to do it or they're not comfortable doing
right.
it.
Yeah.
So if everyone would create a reel, I'd be happy to. Just
Oh,
gonna
thank
say.
you.
Just
Okay.
gonna say I'm always
Well,
happy to because I'm like I really enjoy it weirdly because obviously all the reels and stuff on the Fly People I make. So and they're not great, but they do the job. So if there's anything you want me to make
yeah.
for you, I'd happily do it for you.
Oh, that's so
Um,
nice.
because
Yeah, it is time consuming.
yeah,
It's, it really is. And to do it, yeah, it does look nice when professionals
yeah,
do it better than
absolutely.
just me piecing things together.
So talking about like working in a studio and the idea of like sanctuary, like a lot of artists that I've spoken to in the past talk about the idea of loneliness as an artist because you're working in isolation. Like, how do you kind of combat the idea of loneliness whilst you're working by yourself?
It's definitely something that I've struggled and had to get used to because when I was working full time and doing art on the side, that was my quiet time and I enjoyed the solitude. And now that it's full time being alone, and I, as much as I do prefer, I think, working alone in general, I do miss the interaction of people during the day and then also actually bouncing ideas off of people and having dialogue through the process.
Mm,
But social media, I think, helps. On lunch breaks, I can pop on and have some interaction and feel connected. And then I do try to go to opening receptions, either whether I'm in them or not, really just to support other artists or see what's going on in the art world in LA. And so that helps too. Um, but it's not so bad, or some days are harder than others, or some
mm.
weeks, sometimes you have more things going on that are social, and some weeks are quieter. So just knowing that the busyness will come or the interaction will come, and just sitting with the solitude and being okay with it, sometimes just waiting for the next round of receptions. Or I'm wanting to join a critique group, which I've
Mm.
never done in my professional career, so I think that'll be helpful too, just to be able to have more dialogue with other artists and not necessarily in a reception setting, where it's more focused on preliminary work.
Absolutely. I think that's I actually know you say that. I think that's what we kind of need more of is more like artist critique groups that are going to be actually quite helpful for artists. So I think the
Mm-hmm.
problem is that with social media is because it's kind of open to everybody and anybody. Like sometimes you don't get the kind of feedback you want, or you don't get like any kind of critique. And kind of like, what kind of feedback are you looking for on social media, and what do you like to get?
Um, on social media, I think it's really just about likes, right? I don't think there's as much dialogue as I would like, or it's more like, this is amazing, where
Yeah.
where I'm hoping there's more dialogue when you're in a critique group, where just hearing someone's observation or something that you're wondering about, but maybe someone else sees it totally opposite, where it's really enlightening you to different perspectives on your work, which I think is helpful. Um, it circulates more, and the reach and all the things. But I try not to get too hung up on it. But it is good to know when people have good reactions to things that, and it's not even about a good reaction, but any reaction. It means you've connected with them, that something sparked something in them to connect with you.
So one really curious thing when I was at the other art fair actually is that you popped up into my mind because I met quite a few artists who had just had kids or had young children.
Uh-huh.
And we got to talking about like the balance between being an artist and having a family.
Right.
And it kind of made me think like maybe I should, because I know a few other artists that are in that similar boat, maybe I should get you all together to talk about that. Because I feel
Yeah,
like that would
that'd
be
be
really
cool.
helpful. Because
Yeah.
actually I thought about it and I thought that'd be really helpful because you can bounce ideas off each other in terms of like how you structure your day, your routines, how
Right.
you balance things. I might
Totally.
I might get something like that together because I know at least a good 10 artists I can think of just on the top of my head, you including, that I think, would probably be up for that and would probably appreciate that and probably actually be able to use it constructively.
Yeah,
Because I think that because you're saying about critiques, and I'm like, well, maybe that's something that I should do or try to kind of arrange. Because I know a lot of artists who honestly would want that. Because
right,
obviously, why wouldn't you want to talk to your work, you know,
right,
about your work to other artists who have got nothing but your best interests in mind?
right, right.
So
And it's nice just to have that camaraderie of
yeah.
like the
Oh,
struggle together.
100%.
Um, and what I think is wonderful about social media and Zoom and all these online platforms is the ability to connect with people without having to leave home. Because I
Yeah.
do think there are a lot of restrictions, especially across the pond and traveling, but even just
Yeah.
locally, timing and just to be able to get 10 people together just from across the city to be able to talk for an hour rather than meeting somewhere and the traffic and all the things. So there's
Yeah.
definitely pluses to being able to socialize on social media.
Yeah. Now I'm thinking about that. I'm going to think about that over the next couple of days. I might put that on social media and see if people are interested. Because I know a few artists who I think would really benefit from it. I think every artist would benefit from it.
Yeah,
But I'm just, I think like, there are people who would actually really appreciate it more than just benefit from it. Because I feel like you need, like, sometimes you're frustrated and you just need to talk to somebody who understands. Particularly when it
right,
comes down
right,
to art and being an artist and finding like the need to create. It's like it can be very, it can be challenging. It can be very challenging because it's like you have a desire to create, but you can't always do that. And it's like you kind of need to channel that somehow because it's like you're going to be sitting with that for days otherwise until you then can create.
right,
Like,
right.
hmm. I think like that's the thing though. I think you need community. Community is so important. I think we forget how important community is until we realize how much we need it.
Yes.
And I think as even just the idea of like checking in on people once a week, or even if it's like every 2 weeks, because we're all
Right,
busy,
right.
but it's like that's
Yeah,
so important because it means so much. Like I love that idea. I think that's such a good idea. I'm definitely gonna check that out. I think that's such a good idea. And I love the
yeah,
idea of being like pairing people up together because there are so many artists that I see personally that I'm like these two people would so get along from how I've
really.
spoken to them.
Yeah,
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 because and I'm like these two people I speak to them, they're very similar, or I just know they'll get. You have an instinct. Like I just know they'll
yeah,
get along. So I'm like,
yeah,
oh, I'll have to introduce them.
yeah. That's
So
cool.
yeah, so I'm gonna at some point, I will send you a bunch of artists, and I'll just say, and I'll say to you when I do, I'll be like, oh, just check all these people out. They're people I'm probably gonna vouch for and be like, oh, they'll respond to you if you message them.
That's
So yeah,
awesome.
because I love
Yeah,
I love connecting people. It's like the best thing I could do, and I love it when
cool.
people I know talk to each other, and I'm like, this is
Yeah.
amazing. So, what are your thoughts on the future of art, and what changes would you like to see in the art world?
This one was tough. Most of the things that I knew I wanted to talk about or think about was pretty like direct, and but this one, being so new to the art world, I feel that I don't necessarily know what the
Okay,
right answer is.
that's fair enough.
Yeah,
Well, there
so
is there is no right answer.
right, yeah, yeah. And
No.
I think that I'm just so open-minded to what art is and being so new to the art world, that, I do have concerns about the economy. Obviously, I think everyone
Of
does a
course.
bit. So it's like, well, where do the artists fit in? And I hope that, we can still support ourselves through this by, or still be able to create just through the downturn. Um, and I think you were the one that brought the statistics up about the art world, like out of when the economy or when COVID hit and what
Oh
don't
yeah,
we need,
yeah,
and artists was like the
at the
first
top.
thing to
Yeah,
go. Yeah.
yeah.
So I would just hope that that's not the case and that art still prevails.
What kind of impact actually? Now you just mentioned COVID and the idea of like the artists kind of being classed as like the least essential job or whatever. But like, what kind of
Yeah.
impact do you think COVID has had on the way people see art?
Um, I definitely think it can be seen as more of a luxury and a novelty, which it is a
Hmm.
bit of that. But I also still think it's very important and it is healing and it brings communities together. And I think in times like COVID, that's actually very important. So yeah.
Yeah, I share that sentiment completely, and I think it's kind of interesting that during COVID, someone said to me once, like, someone said, I don't know if they meant it seriously or not, but they were like, "Oh, COVID produced a lot of abstract artists,"
Mm,
and I kind of feel like it's kind of true because it was
yeah.
interesting how people turned to art in times of
Hmm.
crisis, and I think that's kind of
Right.
interesting. As you said, art can be healing,
Yeah.
and a lot of people use art as a way to kind of
Process emotions,
yeah,
I think.
that's exactly
Right?
the word, process their emotions and kind of just understand themselves. And
Yeah.
I think, the fact that we had the time to sit still for a bit and be able to do that is quite helpful for the obviously as a
Yes.
positive note to what happened.
Right.
Um,
Right.
so I think that's pretty beautiful. But I'm kind of also curious, just
Yeah.
like, do you think that anyone could be an artist?
I do. But I think that you have to be creative about art or passionate about art and creative. I mean, I think anyone can be creative. I don't think that you have to be so much skilled as an but you do need to want to produce. And I think that's what's important.
So would you say that being an artist is isolating or liberating, or maybe both?
Uh, Both, for sure.
Yeah.
I think that just the work in and of itself is usually not collaborative, and that is isolating, but then liberating to just be your own boss in a way, and you choose what you want to produce, and then be able to just put it out there. And it is a bit of a struggle, right, to get the space on the wall. There is always that, sometimes a barrier to be juried into a show or get accepted to galleries and such. But in general, um, I think once you are able to share your work, that is liberating.
So I actually had a really interesting conversation with one of my good photography friends. And we were talking about this idea of like artists as introverts and extroverts, and like how that kind of plays a role in the way you present yourself and also like how your work is then perceived. And like, would you say you're an introvert or an extrovert, or maybe a bit of both? But like, would you say you're either of the two? And also, like, how does that affect the way in which you present yourself and your work?
Uh, I would consider myself an introvert, um, but maybe less so than others. Um, and I think it's important and helpful to be an extrovert to be able to share your work comfortably and easily. But, sometimes you can't change necessarily who you are. You can only evolve and try to improve on where you want to. But, I do think a lot of creatives are introverts, and because we are quiet and are thoughtful, and then producing this art in solitude, it just seems like they often go hand in hand. But I know that's not the rule, necessarily. But I do think it's helpful to be more outgoing when it comes time to share your work and want to gain an audience or a following.
So, like, actually, having said that, what kind of a skill would you like to learn that you think will benefit your career?
Uh, Actually, I've been really wanting to work on public speaking because I do feel like I want to share my stories more. And while I can in writing, and there's more ability to edit what you're
Yeah, of
putting
course,
out in the world when you write,
absolutely.
and when you're presenting, and especially gallery presentations and such. Um, I would really like to be able to carry the story through eloquently and help it add to the art. Um, but so that's something that one skill just that's kind of aside from creating that I'd like to work on and improve.
But I think that would be super beneficial for you in so many different ways because, like, if
Mhm.
you were to ever give like a lecture on your work, or if you were just to present even other people's work, or even
Yeah,
just your online presence would be improved because you'll be comfortable, if you wanted to, of course, like speaking in front of a camera and kind of being like shifting the focus to yourself if you wanted to, because obviously I know a lot of artists don't want to be the main focus, they want their work to be, which I understand. But I feel like nowadays in social media, I think there is a big shift in people wanting to know the artist as well as the work.
right,
I think that there's a whole kind of, I guess there's almost like a market even for it in terms of like the artist for the
right,
artist's sake, as
right.
opposed to just being like, the artist is like creative and there's also like the actual work itself. Um, but I think that's a really good skill to learn. And also I think it's a skill that I think we're all a bit afraid of. I think everybody's
Yeah,
afraid of
yeah,
like public speaking and having to
yeah,
put yourself out there. I think we're all a little
yeah,
bit afraid of that. It's only
yeah,
the rare few that I find that I've met that are really good at that.
yeah.
Um,
I mean,
so
I've thought about doing in like live
yeah,
studio on
yeah,
Instagram, and it's more of just a check-in, but it's something that's more natural where or and organic where, oh, I'm just working on this today, and I like that idea, but I'm still too nervous to do
no,
it.
fair enough.
But you know,
See, I
I
think
should just get over it, but
no, but you say, but the thing is that like with something like that, it's something that you will get used to in time. You just have to kind of
right,
give yourself the experience in a way that's comfortable to you for you to do. Because like
yeah,
it's not, I don't think it's you can't just get over it because you won't get over it because it's a big
right,
thing.
yeah.
It's not
And it's
like
about
you're
vulnerability, right?
oh
Too.
100%. It's like attending an art fair. It's like exhibiting your work. You know,
Yeah,
exhibiting your work is such a vulnerable position to be in because people
yeah,
are looking at you and your work and they're judging you and your work in real
right.
time.
Yeah.
You
In
know,
front of
and
you.
yeah, like
Yeah.
that's the one thing. That's the one thing I learned from going to the art fair is that like exhibiting your work is terrifying because you want
Yeah.
people to talk to you about it, but you also don't want nobody to talk to you because you just want to be able to stand there.
Yeah.
It's kind of funny because I was a really annoying guy who went up to artists that was sitting down and being like, "Oh, could you tell about your work?" Because they were sitting down purely just because they were sitting down. And I'm
Yeah.
like, like you're at an art fair, like I would love for you to talk to me about your work because you look like
Yeah.
you don't want to talk about it, so let's talk about it. Um, which is probably a
That's
bad thing on
funny.
my part, but a lot of people who are sitting down, I was like, let's talk. Um, so, what does it mean to be a successful artist, and how do you measure the success of your own work?
Big question. Um, I think a successful artist is creating, and they're showing their work in whatever capacity that is. And I think that there's success. Yeah, everyone has different levels of success or what they consider success. For me, I would like to be able to be an artist only and not have to work a full-time job and share my art on the side. And that, to me, if I could sustain a comfortable lifestyle and create art, that would be a success for me. Um, and then, I'm still trying to figure out what else success means and with gallery representation or what I don't think that that's always the end all be all. And so where do I find my niche of fitting into the art world? And so yeah, it's kind of an open-ended, still learning what that means.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a really good point in terms of like trying to find your place, because you're right, like gallery representation isn't always the best route because
Mhm.
it could limit you in certain ways. But then also, like, what would the alternative be? It's like, like,
Right,
and then if you were going to just sell your prints, if you're going to sell prints and sell your paintings exclusively, like, how do you set yourself up to do that with the right recognition and the right kind of emphasis on you and your work? And it's like, it's a very tricky balance to figure out, like, kind of just whereabouts you should go and where you should lie.
right,
That is tricky, actually. That's actually very tricky because it's like, you have, it's hard because you have like any possibility and any opportunity open to you.
yeah,
But because you have all these different avenues open, which one do you take? And what's going to be
yeah,
the best use of your time? Because time is the thing you need the most.
right.
So it's
And
kind of
I
like,
would love to have the support. I would love to just be able to create art and have a place to show it and it sell and have someone or a a place or a company stand behind me and but I'm still just taking it day by day, and I do find that just one step forward, okay, this is where I'm at right now, always leads me to the next step, and I just
Yeah,
kind of have to trust that.
absolutely. But I love the fact you're thinking it ahead. That's the thing.
Yeah,
You're not just creating art for art's sake. You're thinking ahead. You're like, okay, cool. So what can I do with this, or what do I want to become with this, or like what potential lies in the future, without being
right,
like, oh, I'm doing this. Because I think you're keeping yourself very grounded, and you're keeping yourself very kind of conscious of where you want to move towards. But you're just like, I don't know what it is I want to move towards, but I want to move towards this direction. And I think
right, right.
that's a great place for you to be. I think that's a great place for you to be. And also you
Yeah,
work backs it up as well. So you have kind of like
thanks.
the best of both worlds. Like
Yeah,
you have the mindset and you have the work, and it's just a case of like getting it in front of the right people to
right,
boost yourself forward. Like
right,
90% of artists, I think it's about getting your work in front of the right person who's
right,
going to really appreciate and value that,
right.
and see the potential in it, really.
Yeah.
I think. Yeah.
And that's it's challenging because there's so much out there. There's
Mm,
so many galleries. And really, how do you, I mean, it's not possible to saturate the market. I mean, it is to some people who are on like a really large scale of recognition, but it's just baby steps, I think. Um, but I that's my focus right now is just how can I get my art seen? How can more people know about what I'm doing and getting attention?
do you ever actually worry about the oversaturation of the art market?
I do. I do. It's can be overwhelming. There's so many talented artists and um, you know, the people are around me are like, "Oh, you're so talented." And I'm like, "Well, so is everyone else."
Mm,
So it's definitely hard to compete in a way, and it's at a certain point you just have to not compete and just compete almost with yourself,
yeah.
where okay, where you're just growing from where you were before.
So how do you turn off those comparisons you have? When you see other artists working, you're like, oh, when you compare yourself to them, like how do you get over that?
Really, I try to take inspiration from them rather than um, compare myself to
Mm,
maybe what I'm not, and really just let them be aspirational to me. Where there's a few artists that are I follow here in LA that I love their work, and it's right up my alley. Where in terms of subject matter and perspective, not necessarily technique. I think their technique is more refined, but that's why I love it because it's similar to what I do, and it's very underlying, really the same. But when I look at it's the way they execute it is different, or their perspective is different, and I really appreciate it. Um, and I think working in fashion, you're always taking inspiration from others, from
mm,
what's in store now or what's on the runways, and kind of trickle down. There's always that aspirational aspect, and I think that I appreciate that in the art world maybe more so because of my fashion background,
yeah.
um, where you could be doing something similar, but it's never going to be the same because it's when you execute it that it's always going to be different, and because it's coming from you and not them.
And actually, a question I didn't actually add on to the list, I've just added on to now because I just said that. I'm like, are there any particular artists you want to mention by name that we should all know about?
Um, they're would it be more aspirational artists, or would it be just artists that I
Just,
really
just artists that you think that
love?
people should know more about, that you think are like hidden gems.
Yeah. Um, well, I did just see an exhibit. Unfortunately, though, she's not on social media, but if you do
Uh,
her tag, it's Patricia Childlaw, and she does the LA River paintings as well, and just really beautiful. And like I said, I'm going to talk about the aspirational ones,
Yeah,
and I hope that
absolutely.
they appreciate this, but or are not bothered that I'm like their art fans. I felt I went to Patricia's opening reception, and I never met her, and I wanted to introduce myself, and I felt like such a fan girl, like
Good.
but it really is about having those aspirational artists to like look up to and kind of learn just by observing from their work. But Eric Nash, I really enjoy his artwork. It's very simple, but it's like always kind of this urban take on landscapes that I like. John Tierney, he I believe is a UK artist, but his work is all LA centric. And he does a lot of like the fashion iconic fashion brands and like billboards on Melrose and things, and or just iconic LA things in general. But his are very uh, realistic, and but I really enjoy that. And then I also have my art friends that I always really appreciate. There's an artist called The Quiet. He creates these artworks that are really just these provocative sculptures made out of thrift store findings, found objects, and they're always nods to some political view or overarching systematic issue that I appreciate too. So
That's so cool because I never really asked artists who they'd like because everybody has such different taste.
yeah,
And like the kind of artists that you'd know, like whether that's in person or via online, like are going to be people I have never heard of. And I love that
right,
possibility of
yeah,
like discovering new people and being like, this is really interesting.
yeah,
Um, which is why I asked that question because I thought, oh, you're talking about like inspiration. I thought, oh, actually, let's just ask who
yeah,
they are because I'm
yeah,
always curious to know, you know, what great artists, it's like I love hearing great artists talk about other great artists. And I think that's really, really
right,
cool because
yeah.
like part of the, it's part of your community, you know?
Yeah, totally.
Um,
I mean,
and
I could go on and on and on. There's so many artists, but
what, if you want to
and
send me some, please
yeah.
do.
Okay, sure, I
Yeah,
will.
absolutely. And I will do exactly the same. I've got a list of people I'm going to send you. Because I just love sharing artists and art and connecting people. It's just the
Yeah,
best. So
yeah.
I have a question for you from the last artist I interviewed, which was
Okay.
an incredible artist called Patsy MacArthur, who was just absolutely brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. She was lovely. And her question for you is, how do you work through creative blocks?
That's interesting because that was very much the realm of my question for the next artist.
Yeah.
Um, which so it's definitely tricky sometimes to work through creative blocks. But I think to take the pressure off yourself and not necessarily try to fight through it, but just to maybe step away and take a step back. I think exercise is actually really important for balance and clarity. So whether it's yoga or nature, taking a walk outside, I think
Mm,
that sometimes you do need to get out of the studio. And if you feel stuck, you're probably not going to find the the way out in your studio. I think you have to leave and do something that is either inspiring to you or just kind of replenishing, because I think a lot of creative blocks come from just energy blocks in general that are whether you're tired or there's something else that you need to replenish to keep the creativity flowing.
that's perfect. And do you have a question for the next artist interview?
Well, that's what I was I was going to ask, when you get in a rut, how do you overcome it? But I did have a secondary question. So as an artist, usually you have your identity as an artist and what you put out there and your body of work. But when you want to diverge from that and try something new, how do you handle that process and how do you consider your audience when doing so?
Oh, that's a very good question, actually. How do you
Mhm.
handle the process of trying something new?
And I apologize, I should have sent that to you earlier, and
No, that's fine. No, no, that's
I
fine. No, no, that's absolutely fine. So, what would your younger self think about your work?
I think I would be surprised. Um, I'm actually a very feminine person in some ways, and I think that my work doesn't always, or at least the subject matter doesn't always allude to that. So, and as much as, and I may paint flowers one day, and you know, but and that's actually what I'm drawn to, also. But I think I would be surprised that the industrial landscapes and just kind of the harshness or the what's the right way to say it, just the way that the art presents itself. I think I would be surprised.
Yeah, because it's very gritty, like the subject matter,
Yeah,
like very gritty, and it's very kind of close to the ground, if that makes sense,
yeah,
as opposed to being
yeah,
like very kind of like ethereal and kind of like really beautiful and in some levels quite superficial. Like your work is about the reality of life. It's not about
yeah,
superficiality necessarily. Like
yeah,
there's and it's interesting because there's like hints of nature and romanticism. So there is like
yeah,
potential feminine elements to it, but it's also
right,
presented in a very kind of just straightforward, no nonsense, realistic way. And actually,
yeah,
that's a really interesting kind of way of thinking in terms of like how the artist is filtered through their own work, because obviously you're painting from your perspective.
right,
So part of you is in every piece you make. It's kind of interesting
yeah.
to decipher like where that is.
Yeah. And you know, I do think some of my work is ethereal. I think the skies and the sunsets help make it ethereal. But when you really look at it, the the overall piece isn't intended to be ethereal. There's supposed to be that grittiness that lies within too.
So if nobody saw your work, would you still create it?
I would. Um, I don't think I would be as the way that I plan what I'm presenting. I think I would just paint what I wanted in the moment, where now that I'm actually having to present my work cohesively, there is sort of this element of planning and sticking to what was planned rather than just wanting to paint what I want to paint in the moment. And I think it would change in a way because every moment I might want to paint something else. And you know, when you're working on a body of work, you really have to complete the series in its entirety.
Oh, I was meant to ask you earlier. Like, so when you create your series of work, do you create them side by side, or do you finish one and create another?
Uh, Both. Usually I almost finish one and then I'll move on and I have to let some of it dry and go back and kind of perfect later. When I was working on the factory series over that 10-year period of time, I was often trying to work on them simultaneously, which I liked that it brought a sort of cohesiveness to it
Yeah.
where they all had similar layers of texture, and even though they were different subjects matters in each. So I do like the idea of painting multiple paintings at once, but it also requires space to be able to kind of
Of
spread
course,
out
yeah.
and do that.
Yes,
So
of
right
course.
now I'm very systematic about, you know, I'm working on this one now and I'll get everything done except this area, then I'll put it away, let it dry, move on, and come back to it. So there's kind of a method to the madness right now, but I would love if I could just work on everything kind of at once.
You need a huge studio space. That's why I think every artist needs
Right?
just like some big space, just so they can kind of
Yeah,
create. I just had that like
totally.
freedom to create. Like that's the thing. But
Yeah,
the beauty in what you do though, like so many artists, is that you work with what you've got.
right.
You know, like it may not be absolutely perfect, it may not be the best, but it does the job it needs to do for what the work you create now. In the future,
Yep.
you might go bigger. In the future, you might go
Yeah.
smaller, and your needs will
Yeah.
change for space. But I think what I really appreciate and respect from you and every other artist that I know is that like you use what you have. It doesn't
Yeah.
hinder you. You don't use it as an excuse not to create.
Right. Right. And you
You know.
can't let it
Hmm.
totally.
So would you consider yourself a contemporary artist?
I would.
How do you define the term contemporary art?
Well, I actually meant to look up the true definition of it before, and I forgot. But I mean, contemporary, right, is new, modern,
Yeah.
just kind of non-traditional. And so I think that after that, I think a lot of probably gallery owners and museum curators could definitely have a better answer for you, and
Oh,
perspective. But to me, I'm kind of, it's in the eye of the beholder of what one might consider contemporary art. But I think any art is new and contemporary, right? That you're creating that's new.
yeah. The only reason I ask is because I feel like contemporary is a word that we kind of throw around a lot. But I think we
Yeah,
don't really question what it actually means. If it means
right.
anything at all, it might never mean anything at all, to be honest. You know,
Yeah,
I think we use it so much nowadays that the actual use of it, of the terminology, it doesn't really mean anything necessarily. It just means art made now, which, yeah, that's a very
right.
broad word just for that
Yeah,
particular scope. But I don't know. I'm always interested as well because if you call yourself a contemporary artist, it's like, well, what I like, how are you, like putting a label on yourself, and what label are you putting on yourself by doing that, by
right,
using this term? Um,
right.
but then obviously, who wouldn't call themselves a contemporary artist nowadays? Um,
Yeah. I mean, some artists are more traditional, or they're, painting portraits of homes, and that I wouldn't necessarily con consider contemporary.
Depends on where they're
Uh,
doing it. I can think of contemporary artists who paint pictures of
yeah,
like places. Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
but I guess, yeah, no, I definitely, there's some wonderful artists that paint pictures of homes that is very contemporary, but I also see, like the let me paint, or will you paint a picture of my house so I can have it as like a memory or
I
memento.
see. I see what you mean. Yeah, brand
That's
as
kind
opposed
of
to being
like,
like a commodity to sell.
yeah, yeah.
Ah, that's a good distinction actually.
Something to think about. I'm not sure.
Yeah. No, that's actually a really good point, actually. That's something I'm going to think about for future interviews in terms of the idea of commodity of art. Like, at what point do you square that away with yourself and make, kind of even selling a piece of work okay? Because it's like, it can be very precious to an artist, but then at the same
Right,
time, you want to make money from it. It's like,
right.
it's a weird middle ground of like, being personal and being sellable. It's like you have to
Yeah.
make something that's both. But that's a conversation for another day for sure.
Well, I didn't realize how attached I would become to some of my paintings.
That's
And
interesting. I
it's
think that's pretty funny.
definitely, yeah. Well, and you don't think about it. You're putting it up on the wall and you're like, I want this to sell. And then when someone's just interested and you're buying it, you're like, oh gosh, I'm gonna have to say goodbye, and I might not ever see this painting in person again. And
Because
you
that's the
know,
exact thing. Like, unlike photographs, you're not going to print that again. You can't make
right,
it
right.
again. It's
Yeah.
one of a kind. You'll never get that back again, unless somebody sends it back to you for some reason. But like,
Well,
you'll
I've
never see it
had
again.
collectors know, like, really, and they're like, if you ever want to come visit the painting, let
That's
us
sweet.
know. Or, if you want to have it for another show or a collection
So
show.
that's nice though. I think that's really good when people do that because it's not just then kind of like gone forever, and you can
Right,
always have it back if you, particularly for showing. Imagine if you had a retrospective, you'd kind of want all the work you
right,
created back if it's still
totally.
available.
Yeah.
And oh,
So,
actually, before the final question, a random question
yeah.
for you that I've just thought about. I keep doing this today, so I apologize. Um,
No,
but if somebody brought a piece of your work and they destroyed it, would you be happy with that?
no,
But they paid for
no,
it.
I don't care. A gentleman, he did buy he was buying a print of mine, and um, he was starting to fold it, and I'm like, don't fold it. It felt like it was as like precious to him, and I was really like, I think I stopped him from it. And so I'm definitely, I don't care if they bought it or not. I'd rather have it back. And I know accidents happen, but
Yeah, I
yeah,
mean, I mean, like with intent.
yeah. Oh, with
Because
the intent,
yeah,
absolutely not.
yeah, because
Yeah,
I'm like,
I would
why would
definitely
you?
bother.
Why would you fold a print that you just brought? Like,
I know.
isn't the whole point of buying that print to have it hanging on your wall?
I think he supports a lot of artists. He had been saying, "Oh, I have stacks and stacks of prints," and it was just more to so, give support. It was less for the intent of putting it on a wall. But at that point, I was like, "Oh well, I would rather have someone actually that it means more to them buy it, I would wait. But
Yeah, like
kind of hard.
isn't that quite damaging in a way though? Because you're just buying art for the sake of buying art. You're not buying art because you
Yeah,
care about it. I feel like
right.
isn't that I don't know that's kind of as somebody who's brought a lot of art prints in the last year, I often
Yeah,
kind of feel like, am I just buying these art prints because I know these artists and I like them, or do I like
right.
actually like the work? And I like the work. Obviously, I've got it hanging up.
Yeah,
I've got a few that I haven't actually hung up yet, which I need to do. But
yeah,
it's a case of like I would hate to be that kind of person who just buys stacks of art just to say, oh, I support this person. Like there are other ways of supporting that person. You
right,
could just if
right,
you're really that bothered, you could donate money to them. I'm pretty sure they'll be happy with that, and they could do with
right,
enough with that. Like
right.
somebody else really could have wanted that print, and they might not get
Yeah,
the opportunity to hang it up on their wall. I don't know.
yeah,
That doesn't sit right with me personally. I'm like, oh, I
yeah.
don't like that.
I
No,
know. It
doesn't sit right with
was,
me.
but
I,
there wasn't ill intent really. It was
yeah,
just
but
kind
it's
of
just I think it's
thought.
for me. It's just like the you didn't even think about it, like the blasé
Right,
of just kind of like, oh, it's fine. I'll
exactly.
just fold this in front of the artist. At least
Yeah,
do it when at least do it when the artist has left, so they don't know.
right. I know, I know.
That's
So
insane.
yeah, I was bothered, and I
Oh,
would be
yeah,
bothered if someone destroyed my a painting would be a print. Yes, I haven't really done like the whole limited edition so much. I have here and there, but that wasn't one of them, so it wasn't as serious. But had it been a real piece of work, I actually this is a little personal and kind of funny though that when I was in high school, I was in a serious relationship and I painted my boyfriend a painting. And it was of like his musical artist that he liked, and nothing that I would ever expect him to have on his wall or in his home anymore. And we have obviously since parted ways, and but I
yeah.
we keep in touch here and there. And he mentioned that he still has the painting
Oh,
and that
wow.
it was like a really special gift that he like will always keep. And I was like, wow, I honestly had thought about the painting here and there, like through the years, and wondered if it was in some thrift store or it
Yeah,
made it to a garbage can eventually. And I was surprised to hear that he still had it. And it made me feel like it was nice because it did take time and it was
yeah.
something that I did specifically for him, and it meant a lot that he still had it.
That's really amazing, actually. That's amazing because it just
Yeah,
shows you that somebody appreciates the time and effort you put into something.
right, right. Yeah,
That's so cool. I think that's amazing. That's and big props to him for like not throwing it out because
I know.
some
I was
some people would
shocked
have
when I
like burnt
saw
it at an altar or something.
it.
Some people are
Right.
strange. Some people would do
Yeah,
stuff like that. So
yeah,
fair play.
yeah,
So my last question for you, I'm sure you'll be very happy to know.
yeah.
My last question is, what are you currently
No.
working on, and where can people find more about you and your work?
Well, this is really exciting for me to talk about because I'm working on my first solo show in
Oh,
a gallery. It's at Tag Gallery, which is an acronym for the Artist Gallery, which is on Wilshire Boulevard near La Brea, which are kind of two major intersection roads in Los Angeles, near where I live, which is nice. And it's really a wonderful community of artists. It's a beautiful space. It is a large space, so there's like 5 galleries within the one under one roof. So
wow.
it's kind of, I say a solo show, and I will be showing my work alongside 3 other solo show artists. Um, Bob Spees, Darnell Wayne, and Adele Mills are my solo show counterparts. So these are actually, yeah, no, they've all, I think I might be the only one that it's my first solo show ever. But I'm excited for that. So I am creating a new body of work. And I've it's called Lost Angles. So it's a nod to the lost views and angles of Los Angeles. So really just drawing attention to the everyday sights or what we might not notice. It's a continuation of the work that I've worked on in the last year or two, or the focus, the subject matter. But there are some new pieces and subject matters that will be in addition to what other people have known, what people kind of associate me with from what they've seen before. So I'm really excited. That's May 6th is the opening reception.
Wow.
So that's the main priority right now. And then I will also be working on a couple new series to show in May as well. And you can find my work at emilywallerstein.com. My website has what I've worked on in the past. I do still need to update some more. And then at Tag Gallery, taggallery.com or .net. I'm not any, but that my work is also on Tag Gallery's website too, along with all the other artists that are members at Tag.
That's absolutely incredible. That's absolutely incredible. That's going to be so good for you.
I'm very excited. It's definitely something that I wanted to do for a long time. They hold this group exhibition, a juried group show called the California Open. And I was in the show in 2020. And after that, it was kind of always this aspirational, like I would like to have a show at Tag Gallery in the future. So it's exciting that it's coming to fruition finally.
It's such a good idea at this point in your career as well. Like, it's such a good idea, and I'm really, really happy for you. I'm curious to see what your work is going to be like. So, it's cool. But thank you very much for your time, Emily. I really appreciate it so much.
Aaron. Yeah, it was really nice speaking with you, and it to be able to sit down and talk about everything, it helps put things in perspective from my point of view. But I appreciate the dialogue and being able to hear your point of view on things too.
That concludes the last and final part of my conversation with Emily Wallerstein. Thank you very much for listening. If you have any questions or comments about it, please send me an email at theflyingfruitbowl@gmail.com or get in touch by social media sites such as Instagram and Twitter. The Flying Fruit Bowl podcast can be found on a variety of sites such as Spotify, YouTube, and Apple Music. If you like the show, please consider rating, reviewing, sharing, or subscribing on any of those platforms to help spread the word. Also, don't forget to check out theflyingfruitbowl.co.uk for daily art inspiration. And if you're a creative, please get in touch for a chance to be featured or interviewed. We now also have a Patreon page if you'd like to support the platform further. Tiers start from £1, and more information can be found over at patreon.com/theflyingfruitbowl. Additionally, if monthly donations are not your thing, we also have a PayPal for one-time donations. I'll include a link to our PayPal in the show notes. Once again, thank you very much for listening today. Until next time, folks, please stay safe.